I would be very pleased if you choose to subscribe to my channel. This story takes place in the United States in the 1970s and 1980s. In August 1987, a lone bow hunter in the deep, isolated Molalla Forest of Oregon made a terrible discovery. The body parts were hidden among the thick trees. In just a few days, police found 6 more bodies in the vicinity. It was clear that whomever did these terrible things had transformed the Molalla Forest into a place to throw away their victims. Allow me to introduce you to Dayton Leroy Rogers. Dayton was born on September 30, 1953, in Moscow, Idaho. He was raised in a pious, working-class family and spent much of his boyhood assisting at his father's small engine repair shop. His childhood seemed normal on the outside, but within, his home was full of violence and problems. His father was harsh and even killed household pets by poisoning them or running them over with a car. Meanwhile, his mother contributed to the pandemonium in troubling ways, regularly pacing the house in minimum clothing and confiding in young Dayton about her difficult and disappointing sexual encounters with his father. Dayton's mind was deeply affected by these early experiences, which made him link sex with guilt, agony, and domination. Dayton had been a loner by the time he was a teenager. He showed indicators of emotional instability and deep-seated anger. By 7th grade, at roughly 13 years old, he was arrested for blasting a BB gun at passing automobiles. By 16, he had earned a reputation for carrying blades and getting into trouble. At 18, he exacerbated his violent conduct. In 1972, Dayton enticed a female he had previously dated into a wooded location outside Eugene, Oregon. His first goal was to force himself upon her, but instead, he pulled out a hunting knife and stabbed her repeatedly in the abdomen. Remarkably, the girl lived. She managed to get Dayton to take her to the hospital, vowing to marry him and forgive him for the attack. This unusual manipulation finally saved her life, but she instantly reported Dayton to the police, leading to his incarceration. At the time of his detention for the assault, Dayton received a psychiatric evaluation, where he was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder, a condition indicating a disordered mental state characterized by problems in maintaining normal social interactions. In February 1973, he pleaded guilty to the assault but obtained a light sentence owing to his mental health condition. Instead of incarceration, Dayton was sentenced to a 4-year probation term and sent to the Oregon State Hospital for treatment. While not imprisoned, he was nevertheless able to leave his home and later broke his probation many times. In 1973, few months after his original transgression, he attacked 2 teenage females under horrific circumstances. He brought them up in his car, provided them with alcohol until they were intoxicated, and then tied them up while forcing them to see each other's assault. The hectic incident ended when Dayton's truck became bogged in the dirt, allowing the girls to flee and seek help. Police immediately captured Dayton, who had sustained a head injury during the incident that led in brain damage to his right frontal lobe. Despite this, he was charged with many charges of assault but was judged not guilty by reason of insanity, resulting to his repatriation to a psychiatric facility for additional treatment. By November 1974, he was discharged, considered fit to re-enter society, a choice that looks inexplicable in retrospect. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, Dayton went in and out of the legal system, accruing accusations of serious sexual offenses but typically avoiding long-term consequences. Despite multiple red signs, including a history of picking up young women and subjecting them to harsh abuse, he managed to remain largely free. By the early 1980s, he married a woman named Cher and became a father. To most, he appeared to be an average mechanic and a dedicated family guy, but below this facade, Dayton's troubling cravings grew increasingly intense. By the mid-1980s, Dayton was a ticking time bomb of violent compulsions. He established a meticulous methodology to finding victims that originally garnered little attention. Dayton targeted those he referred to as street women, those battling with addiction or involved in sex work. He realized that these persons were less likely to be reported missing. Within Portland's red light area, Dayton acquired a predatory reputation. Local women found him unpleasant and unusual. He presented himself under the nickname Steve the Gambler and revealed particular proclivities for bondage and torture, fixating on women's feet. This fetish would ultimately play a grisly role in his crimes. His modus operandi was chillingly consistent. Cruising in his pickup vehicle, he would solicit women or hitchhikers, offering them money for company. Dayton often sweetened the deal with strange but seemingly agreed requests. Some ladies considered this as an intriguing proposition, ignorant of the horrors that awaited them. Inside his truck, he kept numerous tools and binding equipment, including extra long shoelaces, cables, and even dog collars, items he would use to hog-tie his victims and suffocate them into submission. He was usually armed with at least one knife, and later, a hacksaw. Dayton was also a big drinker, often consuming vodka combined with orange juice, a concoction known as a screwdriver cocktail. This behavior would subsequently prove to be a vital clue linking him to the crime scenes. In the summer of 1987, Dayton's aggression grew from random incidents to a full-fledged spree. Beginning in June, women disappeared at an alarming pace from Portland's 82nd Avenue and downtown streets. These ladies were known to attend pubs and labor the streets, frequently to pay their habits or make ends meet. Dayton took them up one by one, building their trust before intoxicating and binding them in his truck. He routinely tied intricate knots, hinting that he loved restraining them. As he had done in his previous attempted murder, he would take them to the Molalla River Corridor, a rural stretch of private forest acreage about 30 miles south of Portland. Dayton's deepest instincts were freed deep within the forest, hidden from prying eyes. He subjected his victims to extended beatings, stabbings, and sexual assaults, inflicting misery but not necessarily killing them. He regularly targeted certain regions of the body, such as the chest, abdomen, and, most notoriously, the feet. Successive victim appeared to drive Dayton to greater levels of savagery, as if he was striving to feed an insatiable thirst for violence. No matter how much agony he caused, it was never enough. Dayton's secret existence was unnoticed by those closest to him. After executing these killings, he returned home to Oregon with his wife and tiny child, concealing all evidence from his family, who remained blissfully innocent. By late July 1987, he had left a trail of dead in the forest, including Ruther Giles, 16, Tar Johnston, 18, Cynthia Diane Dover, 20, Lisa Mock, 23, Nondon Sewant, 26, Moran Hodges, 26, and Christine Adams, 35. Dayton had already killed 7 people, but he was far from finished. Dayton executed one final deed in the early hours of August 7, 1987, which led to his capture. His final victim was Jennifer Lisa Smith, a 25-year-old mother of 2 who was in grave financial distress. Dayton picked her up on Portland's Union Avenue and transported her to the Denny's parking lot. Dayton began his normal routine with Jennifer shortly after midnight. He persuaded her to undress and let him bind her wrists and ankles with shoelaces. Jennifer undoubtedly expected a swift transaction, but it was far from it. Jennifer was hog-tied, laying face down on the truck seat, her hands and ankles bound behind her back on the dashboard. In such a vulnerable position, she had little chance of resisting when Dayton lunged for his knife and launched a furious attack. He stabbed Jennifer at least 7 times, in the chest, belly, back, and neck. Jennifer's piercing screams surprised several close bystanders. Around 2:30 a.m., Cher, a woman inside a nearby Denny's, heard the cries and stepped outside to aid. What she and others saw was horrible. Jennifer had managed to break free from her chains and stumbled out of the pickup vehicle, fully nude and dripping in blood. Despite making it only a few meters across the parking lot, she quickly fell. Dayton stood over her, carrying a knife. Jennifer was still alive despite her serious injuries, which included a slit throat and multiple knife wounds all over her body. Dayton fled on foot towards his vehicle after realizing he had gained unwanted attention. Cher raced to Jennifer's side, placing her hands on the stab wounds in a desperate attempt to stop the blood and encouraging her to hold on. Several witnesses went into action as Dayton started his car and sped out from the parking area. 2 brave men rushed into their own autos and started after him. During the chaos, others attempted to block the lot's entrances with their vehicles, but Dayton's pickup truck vaulted the curb and tore through the vegetation, escaping to the street. A high-speed chase ensued along the dimly illuminated residential highways. One determined witness, Richard, 34, followed closely behind Dayton, reaching speeds of up to 100 miles per hour. During the risky pursuit, Richard acquired a clear look of Dayton's license plate. Knowing he couldn't safely push the vehicle off the road, he slowed down and jotted down the plate number on a scrap of paper before proceeding to the Denny's to report it in to the police. Unfortunately, despite the efforts of emergency responders, Jennifer Lisa Smith could not be rescued. She suffered serious internal hemorrhage and organ damage, including deep punctures in her lungs and heart. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival, becoming the eighth and last murder victim, or so it looked. When the authorities received the license plate number, they were able to locate Dayton's home. When they arrived at morning, his family warned them that he could be in his Woodburn engine repair shop. At around 5:35 a.m., officers arrived at the establishment and discovered Dayton inside. They immediately observed blood streaks on his boots and near the shop's entrance. It was also clear that he had drunk. When questioned about his activities that night and the blood on his boots, Dayton lied, claiming he cut himself with a saw and drove himself to the hospital for treatment. He insisted that he had been at his garage all night, but cops became suspicious when they noticed his pickup truck parked out front with the engine still warm. When deputies realized they had their suspect, they arrested Dayton on suspicion of murder and secured the area for a comprehensive search. There was an abundance of physical evidence linking him to Jennifer's murder. During his departure from the Denny's parking lot, he dropped his knife. Forensic testing discovered human tissue and blood on the knife, which matched Jennifer's wounds. Furthermore, Jennifer Smith's fingerprints were discovered in Dayton's pickup. This evidence alone made a compelling case against him for Jennifer's murder, but it was only the beginning. Inside the shop, authorities located a blood-stained hacksaw conspicuously displayed on the wall. A closer look revealed a wood-burning furnace with burnt pieces of women's clothes, such as bra clasps, metal buttons, and shoe components, which Dayton had attempted to incinerate. Among the pieces were bits of belt buckles and unusual garment studs, including star-shaped jean studs that were later recognized as matching victim Christine Adams' jeans. Detectives discovered clumps of human hair scattered throughout his pickup truck, leading them to think that there were many more victims. There were several blood streaks in the truck's passenger seat footwell and ceiling, indicating the presence of multiple individuals' blood. Initially, the police had no notion they were dealing with a serial killer. There was no prior awareness about the Molalla Forest burial sites, and law enforcement was ignorant of the tragic nature of the evidence discovered. They did, however, know that they had potentially discovered a crime scene of startling violence, much exceeding the one murder for which Dayton had been detained. During his initial interviews, Dayton denied any misconduct and stayed mute. However, the real scope of his misdeeds would eventually become apparent. Just days after Jennifer's murder, on August 31st, a bow hunter discovered a woman's remains in a privately owned woodland near Molalla. This finding prompted a huge search of the surrounding area, with authorities discovering 6 more victims spread across the woods over the next few days. At the time, officials had 7 unidentified female victims from a single location. 6 of them were later definitely identified, while the 7th, Mary Johnson, would stay a Jane Doe for decades. The crime scene depicted meticulous sadism. A forensic analysis indicated that the victims had been bound, stabbed, and, in many cases, mutilated after death. One victim was discovered with her abdomen grotesquely disemboweled and a deep gash running from beneath her breastbone to her genital area. One of her nipples had also been cut off. Lisa Mary Mock had serious knife wounds in her lower back and, tragically, both of her feet had been amputated at the ankle. Investigators discovered Lisa's severed feet meticulously positioned beneath her corpse, implying that the killer paid special attention to their placement. Rhea Giles' body had 6 knife wounds in her lower back, and one of her lower legs had been hacked through with a saw, separating her foot at the ankle. Christine Lotus Adams suffered a stab wound to the back, and her right foot was severed and gone from the scene. Christine's wrists were still linked together with a leather dog collar when her body was discovered, and her arms were tied over her head. Maureen Hodges' remains had been disturbed by scavenging animals, and her legs below the knee were never recovered. Even the last victim, 20-year-old Cynthia Dover, whose body was mostly skeleton when discovered, had signs of violent stabbings in her upper back. Investigators discovered severe cuts in the victim's intimate parts, and the pattern of mutilation was anything but random. Ultimately, each of these victims died alone in the woods, experiencing excruciating pain and terror in their dying moments. Authorities soon identified that the killings were done by a single culprit, and it just so happened that less than a month before, they had arrested a guy for murder with evidence linking him to many additional victims. Suspicion swiftly shifted to Dayton since the profiles of the ladies recovered in the woodland closely matched that of Jennifer. Investigators began matching evidence from the Molalla Forest site with Dayton's known activity. At the site, they recovered 38 empty tiny vodka bottles and 34 orange juice containers, items that fit Dayton's known drinking habits. A nearby liquor store revealed he usually purchased 10 packs of the same vodka brand. More striking was the forensic evidence linking Dayton's instruments to the deaths. A hacksaw from his workshop matched characteristic cut marks on the bones of victims Lisa Mock and Christine Adams. At the time, authorities had not yet identified all the remains, so they began going through missing people records from summer 1987. By mid-September, they identified 4 victims using dental records. Investigators also examined nearby street workers, several of whom had unsettling experiences with a man matching Dayton's description. One woman, Heather, had narrowly escaped. By early 1988, police had enough evidence to charge Dayton with many counts of aggravated murder for the woodland crimes. Due to the substantial evidence in Jennifer's case, her murder was prosecuted separately. The trial began in 1988 and received media attention. Eyewitnesses from the Denny's parking lot testified, including Sher, who had seen Jennifer bleeding and crying for help. A state forensic specialist confirmed Jennifer's fingerprint was located in Dayton's truck. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated shortly before convicting Dayton of aggravated murder in Jennifer's case. In the penalty phase, they were asked to choose between life in prison and execution. Given the savagery of the act and Dayton's lack of remorse, he was condemned to death in 1988. The following year, the district attorney proceeded forward with charges for the Forest murders. In early 1989, a grand jury indicted Dayton on multiple counts of aggravated murder. That trial lasted several weeks and included painful testimony from victims' families and surviving victims of Dayton's earlier crimes. The prosecution produced a convincing forensic case tying Dayton to the killings. Rather than admitting the murders, the defense focused on Dayton's mental health and tragic background in an attempt to spare him the death penalty. However, the jury was unmoved. In May 1989, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. During the penalty phase, prosecutors revealed how Dayton hog-tied, tortured, and disfigured his victims before discarding their remains in the woods. Jurors were noticeably shocked by the details. In the end, Dayton was sentenced to death once more, entering Oregon's execution row in 1989. It looked justice had been served, but his legal problems were far from ended. Over the coming decades, his case would become one of the most lengthy and fought in Oregon's history.